my God!
Let's do it!
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Weird Science Comic Boom Indie Comics Podcast. I'm here with Rocky. What up, Rocky?
Life is good, my friend. Had pork ribs for supper, and the timing is always perfect. I mean, you always finish reading your comics. You usually you're always delayed by about 10 minutes because you're just a little bit behind, which is perfect for me because the wife cooks for me around the same time here because I'm 2 hours behind you, so it works out pretty good, So,
yeah, I actually wanted to do this way earlier, and every time I do it, I have to then rely. I end up doing my manga podcast before. And then those always end up going longer because I blame Luke Hollywood. But then when we end up going here, then I need to, because I can't remember anything, I have to reread stuff. And boy, that really came to roost this week because we're going to be doing a number 2, right? But it's not actually a number 2 there's a little, fecal matter joke. I don't know that hit, but we also have a number 1 and then continuing with Starhenge. By the end of this, that I'm going to have to lean heavy on you because of the fact that, boy, that book is dense. And it's not one of those to like, oh, man, I think I'll skim through this again. I sat down to actually do that because sometimes, you already read it. I already read it twice. And I sit down to just, okay, let me get it in my head so I can get, the progression and whatnot. And again, I had to read it all because of how dense it was. And it threw me off. I was getting all upset. Oh, my goodness. But the number 2 that we're going to be talking about is Minor Threats, which we actually missed last week. So that is something that came out last week. And then in the middle of those, a number 1, Hitomi, that I ended up picking. That was my pick for you to read, mainly because it reminds me a bit of a manga. It reminds me of an old samurai type style movie. And it's a little subtle in the way that things go down. But I actually really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to see what you think. But we'll just get right into this, and we will start with Minor Threats number 2. And if you remember, we liked the first issue. We were into it. We thought it was funny. It was well set up. You had some interesting characters in what is kind of an homage / parody of most big comics, the big 2 at least, but other things as well. And in this, you end up having a little more focus on one of the characters, but you end up having it where the focus might show us the guy's not the greatest guy, but they are villains. So we'll see how this goes. And I'm interested to see what you think of it. It is written by Patton, Oswalt, and Jordan Blum with art by Scott Hepburn, colors by Ian Herring, letters by Nate Picos. And it is Start with the Edges. And in this deal, we know that the Batman character, the Insomniac, he is going around and just ripping heads off because they ended up in this universe. A guy, a stickman, ended up killing what is his Robin. And that was the setup. And I like the way that all this plays out because you do get by with less explanation at points because you can just end up, well, that's what Batman would do, or that's what they do. And in that, though, you see a lot of crazy characters, and you do end up starting with a backstory that is a bit of, it's sad. You actually haven't. And I think in this, the backstory ends up being a little more detailed than what we usually get, or at least sometimes get in the big 2, where we see Brain Tease, the Riddler of this. He was a little kid that was abused, but was always good with riddles and clues, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right, and I love what Patton Oswalt does here because this is a perfectly named comic book. Basically minor threats, but the irony is that a lot of these minor threats, they could probably be major, and the emotional core of this issue, I think, is this Brain Tease character who is kind of a joke character. He's always looked down upon, and yet what I love about this, he potentially could be one of the more formidable foes in the entire world, but yet he, because of his own probably insecurities and what his power of being able to see the future as one completed puzzle, but not knowing exactly how the puzzles fit in what order, and he's powerful, and yet he's debilitated by his own insecurities or something, and the way that it plays out in this story here, I think it really works because it really threw me. Patton Oswalt has done a really good job here of the focus here, this idea that Insomniac is sort of like this world's Batman, who's basically gone insane because this world's Joker, the stick man, has killed his sidekick named Kid Dusk, and he's going
Mhm.
around killing people. That's the broader story. But the true story, the core story, are the character moments here between Playtime, this Frankie Follis
Exactly.
character, and all these little smaller, literally minor threats. These D-list characters make up the heart and soul of this story, and it works really well. He does a really good job here.
Yeah, and when you see this, it is funny because it is if this was the big, giant summer blockbuster movie, it would be the Insomniac, the Batman character, doing this, going for revenge, but then you'd have that in the side, "Wait, what were those guys running by there?" And it does play off almost like the last Suicide Squad movie, things like that, where they are these minor threats. They're the ones that nobody's paying attention to, and I like how you put it, and I'll put it I always do sports. It's either gonna be sports metaphors or music. I'll go sports here, where you end up having Brain Tease, who at one point seemed to be a star. You have at one point Kid Dusk talking to him in a flashback where he's thinking, "Oh, the times that I ended up going against, the Insomniac." And even at that point, he had stepped down a little on the ladder. But in my mind, in sports, it would be like a baseball player who at one point's a perennial all-star, but then they end up they're getting older. Not that they're the worst, but they end up, I don't want to offend people, but they're on the Pirates now, right? They're on a team. So even though if they were on, say, the Astros or the Yankees, their skills, they wouldn't be the best, but they could end up being bet. But now they're on the deal. They're never going to get back to that top because of the idea that they're almost even looked at as over the top or actually over the hill. And when you see Kid Dust, like, you just don't have it anymore. But we see he kind of does. But maybe it's like one of those things back to comics, Theo. It's like a Golden Age character that is kind of a joke because they haven't updated, and that's kind of a meta thing as well. I mean, I'll go with I'm not a huge Tom King fan, but nobody could have seen Kite Man coming from anything of making it. And again, still was a joke, but like this book, I mean, Tom King ends up giving him a backstory that you're very sympathetic. You have all these things going wrong, and you kind of see that sometimes in these comic book world. It takes just that break, that one deal. But on the opposite side, if you become looked at as a joke, they're going to treat you like a joke, and you're not going to get back. And even by the end of this issue, where we do see that a lot of this is Brain Tease, number one, wants to kind of get away from his nonsense. Like you said, he can't, but he just wants to be relevant again. That's his play here. I want to be looked at as pretty cool and good. It's not enough for him so far here to be looked at by the minor threats team. He does not respect them, so he doesn't care about their respect. I think it might come back to that at the end where he realizes as long as you're with friends and people have your back. But at this point, he wants to get back to the big time. And boy, he does kind of the long con with that, where he knows that the rest of this team, and that's the funny play. He's a joke, but he's on a team that he thinks everybody else are jokes. He thinks he's the best. I'm, Insomniac's number one villain. He's not anymore, but he'll still go with it. And you could play that with the Riddler. I mean, after, Batman 66, the riddles are goofy, but you know as well as I do that the Riddler, a pretty bad butt guy. I mean, he's can be really, really badass in the deal. And so he sets up this deal like he's working his magic and putting the pieces together. But in the back of his head, he just needs to get to relevancy, which means to get to this nightclub. It's pretty crazy. When you see the reveal and the twist that he's been kind of duping them at a point, it kind of is, oh my God. But then you remember they're all villains. I mean, they're going to stab each other in the back. They're not really a team yet. They're a convenient team thrown together because they want to get this money by taking down Stickman. But they're not long-term friends, long things, and so I really like that play.
Yeah, no, it worked really well, and I think that there's almost like a double play here at the end because even though
Yeah,
he's playing his friends, but yet at the same time he really does know how things are going to end.
yeah,
He really does see the puzzle. He sees the future, but he always he doesn't know how the order that the pieces of the puzzle go in to get to the end. So he's seen what happens to Playtime potentially. She ends up getting shot at the end. He sees her potential fate. How that arises, he's not entirely clear. But I almost think like he tried to he almost tries to get control of the individual pieces of the puzzle,
Yeah.
by I think maybe trying almost by when he by betraying his team, by trying to set them up,
Yeah, yeah.
in and basically setting them up so that they meet at this nightclub, this trophy room nightclub where, which will draw in Insomniac, and the stick man is, ends up putting the dead corpse of,
Oh, it's awful,
the
right?
corpse
Kid Dusk, that
yeah,
little
Kid
kid.
Dusk,
Oh
yeah.
god.
It
Yeah,
it
it's
was
horrible.
yeah, it was horrible, like, this is actually like it's kind of a dark
It's dark. I mean, it
comic,
is
like
it's funny because the art and the jokiness of the things kind of end up, trying to get it a little more less dark, but boy, at one point, you have a dead body of a little kid come in on, like, a jazzy scooter. That's dark. I mean, that is
yeah,
real dark, but I love just as you're going where you end up even characters that aren't named, because there are a bunch that are here when you go into a night it's like the cantina in Star Wars where you end up yeah, they might focus on this guy, that guy, but the real fun is to watch everything else that's going around, like who's at the bar. And there's some really, really neat character designs. You end up having things going down, and even on the way there. And I think that one of the plays here with this minor threats deal is to show that everybody, even somebody you think as a joke, they all have their purpose and they're actually people. You know what I mean? Like they do end up helping even if you only talk to pigeons or just listen to them, as he said, like you can still be important. I think that that's where I think that you have this play where Brain Tease will figure it out. I think that Brain Tease doing his things and checking out all the stats because of how he was abused by his dad. And even that, like he figured out he was good at puzzles so he would enter contests. And if he didn't win, his dad's just beating him senseless with the trophy for third place, stuff like that. I think that he has become somebody who his life, his puzzles, the way he thinks life goes very singular, very solo, that he would do these things. The Riddler, he always has his henchmen, but all in all, in most stories, and even stuff like a Gotham Central, he started out, Riddler started, and he had a partner that he killed immediately. Well, he's a solo type guy, and I think that he's going to realize that as you add more, it's funny, more pieces to the puzzle actually gets bigger, more important, and maybe you can even do more with it. I think that that's going to be his not redemption arc because I don't know that any of these characters will be redeemed. I don't think they want to be. They just want to be relevant. They want to get money. Everybody has their own little deal. Even Playtime, who we saw and will probably continue, obviously, with the mother and things like that. And I think that one of her things is, that play of when does a sidekick actually become their own hero? And I think that, a name Playtime, you're not going to be able to, it doesn't stick very well when you're 48. It seems kind of, I think they're going to have a lot of plays like that. But I really do think that in this, as you see, Brain Tease just sell them out. But I'm not so sure he realized everything that was going to go on here. Like you said, he sees some of the pieces, but Stickman is at this nightclub and ends up drawing in Insomniac. And Insomniac comes in and he's looking for blood and he's just going to town on everybody. And it's that idea if Batman would go bad, how bad he would be. And he's just destroying them. Even when you see that Jazzy, that Kid Dusk is in, they have little post it notes to show exactly how he died. Like they have stick figures. There's the whole deal. There's him breaking his back. There's him. It's bad. I mean, this is like they say, putting chum in for the feeding frenzy that's going to be with Insomniac. And I thought it was really cool. I even like the little touches where you end up having playtime, and she gets mad. She realizes. She looks around, and this whole thing was that, Brain Tease said what Stickman's going to do is he is in jail. He hears all the trash talk of he's a joke. And then when he got out, he killed Kid Dust. Now he's going to want to sell. This is all she figures out. No, this is about you. And when she does figure that out and get mad and goes after Brain Tease, I love that you have those little army men that are actually like alive then. And that it's so cool.
Stick boys or what?
Yeah. Oh, it's so cool there. And yeah, she's like so pissed off. And then the stick boys are there. But in that one point, you even look, you have like these little green army men that are about to shoot the
Yeah.
Brain Tease because that's her power. She makes toys come, alive. But boy, it's pretty cool. And then once you end up getting, and it's funny because you said Insomniac, that play isn't the major part. So when he comes in, I almost don't care about him. I almost don't want that part of the story in because I think that the fun is the back and forth between all the other characters, and these minor threats are very interesting.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the play too. Like a Superman, and people say he's boring because he does the same thing. He goes that whatever. But the villains are the thing. They're always wacky and fun, and I love that. And just to see that Rubik's Cube bag that's I tell you, I really like playtime a lot in the character design, and seeing her falling off a roof shot. Not great. I don't want that to happen, right?
Yeah, well, I love playtime because in the first issue we got teases of what her power was in the first issue, and in fact we felt a little bit sorry for her because she felt like it was like her powers were almost kind of a joke because
Yeah.
it was like she would think of something and it would conjure up a toy or conjure up something, and it was almost kind of, I mean, there was a reason why she got the name Playtime. And so what I
Mhm.
like about this issue is you can, it's sort of like the warnings you get when you buy the toys. It's like the
Oh,
toys,
yeah.
every toy is potentially dangerous, but yeah, you're gonna play with toys. The toys aren't that bad. But playtime, finally in this issue, we get. I made a note of one. We got her. She uses a pickup jacks as a
Yep.
weapon. Inflated balloon fist with spikes. She has birthday candle rockets. She's got the Rubik's cube satchel and then the Nintendo belt buckle that she's
Yeah.
wearing. I mean,
It's
it
so
works really
fun.
well. Yeah,
And it does.
yeah.
And we said it before, the fun play of this is that you're drawn to care about these characters because the character work is already really good, and I don't think of them as jokes. That's the thing. That's the play in this universe. They kind of are because of what they're doing, but you already know more about them as characters, so you kind of think of them as not jokes, and you're rooting for them. These are villains. These are bad people for the most part, and you're rooting for them because they're underdogs and they're not respected, and there are point of view characters, but it's crazy that you would think that, like, "Oh, man, I hope that she's alive." Like, this is crazy, the idea that you're rooting for villains, but the heroes in this universe don't seem to be the greatest, but it's not like as far as The Boys goes. It's not
Yeah.
like, "Oh, man, they even say at one point as they're going there and they're taking public transportation because they're undercover in plain sight, that sort of deal. But when they're going, they end up seeing all the other heroes beating the crap out of villains. And they're like, oh my God, everybody's in, this mode, they're hurting. And I think it was Playtime who goes, no, 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 you don't get it. They're actually doing this so that they can take them away and that they won't get killed by Insomniac. It's that weird play of actually them trying to do something good, but they're stuck in this, back and forth with these villains. But yeah, it's seems already like, boy, this is pretty well developed, and you get the idea of how things are going. But the things that we don't know are stuff that are intriguing, like what different power sets and all the other things. I really enjoy it. I really think that it's very impressive, and the art really fits it. I think that it's pretty cool. How about you?
And yeah, and I should say that the lead character, one of the central characters, Playtime. She's actually, her mother is known as Jack in the Box, and it was her
Hmm.
mother who actually got her a job as a bartender, where all the D-listers go in the first
Yeah,
issue. And but in the flashback where it showed her mother, Jack in the Box, her mother has a very bitter memory of Insomniac,
yeah,
and I got the impression from some of the flashback pictures that she was actually the equivalent of, she was the Catwoman to
yeah.
Insomniac's Batman, and so I'm wondering, is it possible, could
That be
Playtime
the
be the
daughter.
daughter, could be
It
the
might
daughter of
be.
Insomniac?
And then you
And
get almost a Damian Wayne feel, but in the opposite
yeah,
way, like, right?
and
That's
and
crazy.
and I think where this could be heading, and I'm just imagining ahead, if she's the daughter and her power of being able to conjure up toys and some, there's a sweetness and a compassion, and there's almost like
Yeah,
a love aspect to her power because it's based on what her own memories that,
yeah,
I think she might be the thing that pulls Insomniac back from the edge
might be.
of uh, and I think that's quite telling. Not, I mean, not that that's going to happen, but the
If it
fact that I
I
even
can
think,
see it happening, though.
yeah,
I think you might be right, and the idea I wouldn't think that Playtime has any idea this would be a reveal, but remember the big thing is that, "Hey, when you're out there, get that deal of mine," that stupid Insomniac, he ended up grabbing a trophy, all these things, and if we do find out, yeah, and it would be a shame too, because then you're playing that idea that if she only knew before, maybe she would have been a hero, but now it's Damian Wayne, same deal, and the funny play is in this. if you're gonna do that, it makes complete sense, and I think you're 100% right because of the idea if I sat here and quizzed you, who's the only person in this book that you think is a good person, that seems to have some morals and actually is somebody who you it would be her. I mean, and she's a villain. She's their sidekick villain, and that's crazy in the way too. I think Insomniac eventually, like as we play this, a Jason Todd will need a Tim Drake to make him a little more, on the light
Yeah.
side. That would make
But
sense.
I'm
It would make
still
sense.
I'm still hoping for some redemption for Brain Tease here because Brain Tease he knew he was going to get the shit kicked out of him, getting them into the club, and that
Oh yeah, yeah,
ultimately it was going to have to be Snake Stalker who basically entered the
yeah. The
wrestling
pit.
tournament to take on Kill Pig. I mean, I love these names of these
Yeah,
characters, and so and even at the end, Brain Tease as he watches playtime
yeah,
fall, he says, despite how much he wishes he could change it, it was like, so I'm getting the sense that Brain Tease is not fully evil. Like he does have some moral code, but he's so screwed up and he's so this debilitating power he has where he sees the future so much as and I think he's just genuinely confused and he feels helpless despite the fact, I mean, how many people who could see the future would feel helpless? And yet you get a sense with Brain Tease that he actually feels completely debilitated by such an extraordinary power. And that's what I
yeah.
find him so fascinating. And, again, kudos to Patton Oswalt for, weaving all these characters in. And I don't even want the Continuum to show up. The Justice League of this world, the
No, I don't
Continuum,
either.
who cares? Keep them away.
Telling you when Insomniac, it's a good play that he comes into this nightclub and starts wrecking house because it progresses the story. But I said I don't really need to see it. I think one of the greatest plays to show that that's what Patton Oswalt and Jordan Blum are doing is you end up where they're on public transportation. It does look. At first I thought it was definitely like a elevated train type deal, but it might be, but it's weird. You don't ever really see exactly. I think it just whatever, but they're going and they're watching out the window of these other heroes beating up other villains. They're naming some things, but it's almost like, yeah, we'll get by that quick and let's see it almost like it's a TV show. And they're doing it as well. They're just getting through the city to get to the nightclub. But that was enough for me. I like to see them like they're oh my god, look, that guy looks like US agent. You start laughing like this guy looks like that. That guy looks like that. And when you end up having the names, what I think that both of the authors do very well is they're doing something with a parody here that you're walking a thin line. But when you do it right, you are able to cut some corners because we know the trope you're going with. And when they're like, "Oh my god, there's Weather Vane." Well, I can guess what Weather Vane does because I'm so familiar with Weather Wizard and all. And even looking at him and oh man, they wrecked his Twister mobile. And that even looks like the DeLorean. And I'm like,
Yeah.
this is just fun. And it looks like there's like a fishing pie. No, actually, that is from the DeLorean deal. It's full out. The DeLorean, now that I see it, because that's the pole that would have caught the wire as they went through. And so that's fun. And then you're like, "Oh my god, they're doing a crackdown," but even then you see, like, a fat Cyclops. I don't wanna shame him, but, there he is, and all these things going down. It's like,
Uh,
I wanna say you almost want to have just all these other books with other things. When you go I said the cantina scene, you end up seeing a guy who kinda looks like Bullseye, but the thing on it might it be a key lock. I'm telling you, the one
yeah.
guy in the back that looks like this guy has to be the Fist. I mean, he's just there. He's got a fist as an emblem, and he's giving the fist up, and I'm like, "Oh, look at that." But it's so fun. It's so
Yeah.
cool, and the way that they play these things. There's Dr. Jackal. There's all the oh my. Every time you mention something, Great Caesar's Ghost,
Yeah.
these are
I,
just fun,
I,
right?
I
And
actually, you mentioned something about Patton Oswalt. He's very familiar with the tropes because he's actually like you and I. He's like us. He's a diehard comic collector like the
yeah,
rest of us. He's got that in his history, in his blood. And somebody that is passionate about that, I want Patton Oswalt to. I want him to write some mainstream DC comics after just
he
watching
writes
this.
a little bit at Marvel, and I
Yeah,
don't obviously, he's not exclusive, but for some reason, they've gone, "Why isn't DC asking him to do something
yeah,
and write something?" Because there's always, room for even if it is this is the thing, the way that Patton Oswalt is doing this, and Jordan Blum, we kinda mention him a little, but it's Patton Oswalt's the big name. But when we do it, it doesn't necessarily have to be a funny book. It could have a sense of humor. It doesn't have to be full out everything a parody like this because he does show here that he does know the tropes. He does know the things. It works out really well. And I think that he could end up writing a bunch of things. Him, like, if you go straight up humor, whatever, I think he'd kill it on like a Plastic Man. Like right off the
Yeah.
bat, boom, just have that. But I think that he could just do just about anything. The way that he's writing it, would just I bet it's more up to him than anybody else of his scheduling and stuff. But he's really impressing me with this. I really like it.
Yeah, no, the character work here is absolutely excellent. 2 issues in, and when I think of the substance, I just feel like there are story arcs where I'll read 6 to 12 issues and I don't get as much substance as I have in these
Yeah,
first 2 issues of this minor threat comic book that I mean, literally, I mean that metaphorically as well. I mean,
yeah,
just I mean, it's I this people should give this more attention because you're getting a lot of
I
bang for
agree.
your buck, and I would encourage people to pick this up either digitally or if you're going to pick up a comic at your local comic shop. This you're getting a lot of bang for your buck, and especially if you're someone that you're tired of trying to get into comics because X-Men is too convoluted or DC you can't understand the latest crisis. You
Hmm.
just want, but you like like you say, you like the tropes or you like a good superhero story or a little bit something off the beaten path. This is it. This is what
It
you want to
is.
pick up.
And you can tell right away because of the way it's set up. That's one of the things that we like about indie that we've talked about before. This isn't an assigned book. Somebody didn't come to Rocky and say, "Hey, I want you to write Batgirls." And you're like, "I don't know anything about them." "Well, we'll pay you." Okay. This obviously could not happen without Jordan Blum and Patton Oswalt going into this, having the story and wanting to tell it, and Scott Hepburn on art because what this book has is imagination more than most books that we have nowadays. A lot of things feel very cookie cutter, especially at the big two, and this doesn't feel that way. That's the reason why something like Black Hammer is so good, or you could name any of the really big ones. It's funny because when you have the fight in this, it actually reminds me of Do a Power Bomb,
Yeah.
which is one of my favorite. But and
Yeah, it's
again,
funny.
though, when these are those type of books, because I feel the same way as this, as Power Bomb, that when you read it, you just have fun and you have a smile and you're like, oh my God, look at that. And but you realize that there's something else to it because you're attached to the characters by the end as well. It's not just a laugh fest. You actually have a connection. So I think it's really good. What would you give it?
I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this. I After I read it the first time, I felt like I just loved it. I read it the second time not to understand it, but because I wanted to read it a second time,
Hmm. Yeah,
which
yeah.
is unlike another comic we're going to be reviewing today, where I
Yeah,
had to read it because I had to to understand it.
yeah.
But yeah, I enjoyed it. I'd give this a solid 9. I enjoyed it. 9.
I think I'm gonna go 9.2. I'm gonna go 9.2, I'll say, not just 9 as well. I really liked it. I really did, and it's one of those things, normally, when we're doing this stuff, we missed it somehow last week. Normally, we would say, "Well, we'll catch it the next time, or we'll get some number 1." No, this is that good that I even said to you, "Boy, it's pretty good. We should do it," and you agree because you liked that first one, and this ends up where I was really afraid that it might take a dip, and it did not. It's just as interesting, just as cool. But move to the next book. This is a weird one. I ended up again. I wanted you to read it, and I wanted to see what you thought because this is like a deal. And people might say, "Jim, you're insane," and they do a lot. My wife says it, but when you end up going into this, not the art, not any, it has to me the feel of a manga because of the way that the story progresses. They end up where some of the corners are cut a little, but it ends up building and building, and you end up getting invested in a character that you don't even think you know a lot about, but yet somehow the universal concepts that you're being given and things like that. And the art doesn't hurt. I like the art personally, but it ends up by the end that I was intrigued of what was going on. Plus, it's kind of a book that we really don't have much like in all of the other comics we read. This is a samurai, feudal Japan tale. We don't really get much of that in the regular mainstream, especially the big two. But it is Hitomi #1, and it is written by H.S. Tak with art by Isabella Mazzanati or Mazzanti. I'm gonna butcher
Yeah.
that. Yes, layouts by Nicoletta B. and colors by Valentina Napolitano.
That is
So,
such a cool
and
name,
letters by Rob James.
Napolitano.
I know. And, letters by Rob Jones. And you end up having it starting winter. You have it, I think, 1590. The font is really small here, and I have bad eyes, but yes, 1590 Japan. And you end up seeing a girl who's just walking out of the, the woods or whatever, coming there, and it's snow all over. She's coming in and she's going to a house, ends up going and says, "I'm looking for a samurai." And like, what do you need a samurai for? And she says, "I need a samurai with skin as black as beetroot." And that just sets it up. There's the setup of this girl coming out of the whatever, the wilderness, saying, "I need to find this samurai." At first, I'm sure you get vibes of like a Seven Samurai deal, an idea, oh, her village must be under attack. And, you're going to go with that trope. She needs to get samurais and go. No, what we find out is the samurai, who is a black man, which is very, unique in Japan at this point. And that's kind of the point of it. Hey, that's where you can go and say, I need to find this, guy. And they're like, oh, no, no, we haven't seen it, this and that. But it seems as if this black samurai has killed her family. She has no idea why. She doesn't know why she was spared. And this is what she's doing, almost in the idea of, I don't care if I die. This is the one thing I have to do. But they tell her to go off. And when you look at it, the idea, it looks really cool. This winding path that then she has to go up this mountain. And she goes up, and there is a master that they end up saying, go up there. The bastard, will probably want something in return, but he might be able to help you. And I liked it. I actually, again, though, this is more of a subtle deal of a book. It's not in your face in my mind. Things are just like you'll have a page of this master that she goes and sees. They're just sitting there talking to each other. But I really did like it. But how about
Well,
you?
yeah, to me, it all focuses around sort of the idea of identity because we
Hmm.
never learn this young girl's name. She she
Nope.
she even describes herself as nobody. She actually says that I'm nobody,
Yeah.
and she doesn't have a family. She says my father is gone. My father was killed. My mother was killed. My brother was killed the samurai who we eventually by the end we do end up learning the name of the samurai, but the name is even unimportant. And meanwhile, we do meet this we come to meet this black skinned character who I believe we are to believe is this
Yeah.
samurai who is a Ronin now, learning sumo wrestling. One gets the sense that maybe he's seeking some kind of redemption, or he's given up being, he's clearly had something's happened in his past.
Hmm.
There's even hints that the recollection and the memory of this young girl is probably a little bit skewed, and that
Hmm.
her recollection of what happened to her parents is probably wrong. So, as the reader, and this is all through the art, not the dialogue, just
Yeah.
the art conveys the idea that maybe, just maybe, is falsely remembering what happened. Maybe this dark-skinned samurai was in fact someone who rescued her, who helped her. You don't know that. And there's even a hint as to who the true villain might be. And
Yeah.
all this through the art, which is, I think, kudos to Isabel Mazzanti, colors by Valentina Napolitano. I just wanted to be able to say the name again.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes.
I really
It's good
enjoyed it.
though.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I really like it too. And the thing is, she says she's nobody. And again, there's a cultural deal in this as well. And they have a little intro thing, and it says in feudal era Japan, a drifter with no prospects begins training in secret under Yosuke, a disgraced, once feared warrior, as she struggles to find her place in a society entrenched in discrimination and violence. So, what you end up having here, first off, it seems as if a black man in feudal Japan like here is not going to end up being treated very well. But we also have him as a samurai that's a Ronin. That means he has no master and he's looked at as crap. You have a girl who comes in out of there. She doesn't have a family, which means she has no property, nothing. She means nothing and even says she's nobody. And all of these are swirling around. And even the idea when they do send her up that mountain, this isn't one of those stories of I've come to learn under the great master, Rocky. This is, go talk to that lousy drunk up there. He's probably going to want something like he's just like everybody seems like they're primed for some sort of redemption, but there might not be redemption because some of these things are set pretty well in stone and what ended up happening. But like I said, I think I agree with you whether or not she's remembering things right or told something or whatever, but the idea where it seems like everybody's haunted by some sort of past and all they wanna be is somebody. I mean, to the point where we were just talking minor threats where they wanna be respected. This is at a point where you legitimately are gonna have to fight to just be recognized as a person, and that's crazy. And again, here's the thing when you start thinking about it, because again, not a ton happens, a lot, but not a lot. You're also gonna have to deal with the idea of a girl at this point learning to try to be a samurai. That's not really accepted either. There's a like you get obviously Mulan things swirling around and stuff like that, but like you said, the art though is so cool. Even at the point where when she has that memory and she's telling, this disgraced trainer, this master, who ends up not really wanting anything. Like that's like the crazy, like, oh, he's gonna want something in return. That bastard. He just wants company. The guy's lonely. But when you end up where she starts telling the story of what she wants to do and why, you do end up having a full page that then suddenly becomes like back in the day, Japanese woodcut, something on a silk bat. Like it does change that, and it looks so cool as a way of showing this deal in the background. And then it, comes to her again, and he's like, "All right, get up. We're gonna train. We're gonna do this, and let's figure some stuff out." But I did really like it. I really did like this whole book. And then what seemed everything is like a mystery, and you're trying to figure it out because then you see, and you have to figure this black guy has to be the guy because even when they talk about, this guy with skin as dark as beetroot, like they don't even have like she doesn't even have a real way to describe it but that because it's probably so unique that nobody's seen it. But when you say that, oh yeah, that guy, I know that guy has to be dead. Like people will know if they had seen him, and I thought that was cool. But you have this skinny tall guy trying to do sumo wrestling because he's got to do something else, and it does seem like they're heading off to town to maybe even or the city to try to like make some money doing this and stuff. Because even then, you get this master. He seems to be almost like a slave to this one guy, and the guy is so sus, and he's like, "Hey, you could kind of go bed down some men and women while you're there, make a real good amount to pay me back." Like he's an indentured servant, and he's like, "I don't do that." And almost he still has the honor of what he was. He's just not that anymore. I thought
Yeah.
that was crazy. And when I said about that, and I'll go and ask you about this. When I said about it, the manga feel, and I even said this to Luke. I told him right before we ended up recording. Told him that if you were like a Demon Slayer fan in manga or anything like that, I think that you could go right into this and like it. But here's where you cut a little corner that's kind of odd but works out, is when she runs into this kid. And then, I mean, they're boom, they are fast friends and they're making money together with the fishing. It really is like, okay, we don't need to see how let's go with it. But it works out by the end, I thought. But that's where you cut a little bit of the corner there to get the story going, because this kid just is there fishing and she ends up getting involved because he kind of needs a hand. Uh,
Yeah.
but what did you think?
Well, there's so many little, nice little moments in this story. I could start anywhere, but I'll start with the kids. This young girl, this nobody. You know, on the story starts off. You think that this young girl is so focused on being so focused on finding the black samurai that killed her family, and she wants to literally steal the soul from from this person, and she's
Yeah.
determined, bound and determined, and yet she's still a girl, and she still has a heart, and she kind of has a crush on the young boy.
Yeah.
And she, she has dragon breath, and her breath must have been really bad because the
Yeah.
next day he sort of takes off, steals her stuff, and
Oh
leaves.
yeah, I
Just
know.
when and there's even a one, and she even steals the sack, the what do they call it, sake,
Yeah,
the
the sake
the
from
sake.
because they
Yeah.
actually run into a caravan. And when she goes through, and I have a kind of a crazy deal too, because anybody she runs into, she says, "Hey, have you seen this samurai with the, skin as dark as beetroot?" This keeps going as she's doing this. She's gonna end up, and she does cross paths. It's a weird way where she ends up almost dead, and this guy saves her. And is this the fate that they're intertwined? But
Yeah.
in that, she has to watch out what she's saying sometimes. She's really, I think, so naive, but
Precocious.
also and because when the samurai's there, he has some sake and she steals it. And this boy that she, "Oh my god, what are you doing? You stole sake from a samurai?" And she's so funny. She's like, "No, I stole it from the horse because it was on the horse." And he's like, "Oh my god, we're doomed. We're doomed." And you kind of get this feel of like, "Come on, dude. You're way, Mr. Drama King over here." He's right. That guy comes after, but
Yeah,
even at that point, while that's going on, and she kinda dooms herself a bit, but fate intertwines, you do end up and I really like the quick interaction between the sumo wrestler and the what we think is this former black samurai, because you end up where they're talking and nothing's like, "Hey, this is what's going on." There's no overall narration to the point of, "And then they walked here, and this guy was this, they were that." A lot of it is just right from the dialogue and, like you said, the art. But I like when this sumo wrestler and the samurai talking, and or we'll just call him a Ronin, really. And he's like, "Hey, you must like being Master Man's donkey, huh? Why don't you use your length, old man?" And he ends up because if I used it, the fight would go on and on. Almost the idea if I become what I was, I'll never like. He is looking, it seems, for redemption. But when that sumo guy says, "You like being the master's donkey," I'm like, "What?" But then when we go and see them go off, he's actually the guy on the rickshaw pushing the rickshaw while the sumo guy is there with the luggage in the back. I thought it was really funny the way that they're going because there is the sumo wrestler who's just as bad off, it seems, as the, Ronin, but he even looks down on him because of what he is. And I just like the character interactions and how this is going on. And like you said, this guy right away, this master man, he just looks sus right away. You don't trust this guy. You wonder what happened, how he became indebted. But I really liked it because of the character work and the art and the way the art tells the story. Because when that samurai comes and chases this girl down, he ends up knocking her off a ledge, like off a deal, and she goes and breaks through ice, and she's gonna die. She gets saved, and the idea that and it's the Black Samurai. And you're like, "How did he know what happened?" And man, this is like really fate, like going in there. But yeah, you have this master's like, "We don't have time for this. Like, come on, let's go." And yeah, and he looks like, and even earlier she's called a mongoloid. It's
yeah.
harsh the way they're treating her. And yeah, that's even brought up again as he kind of makes sure she's okay, but they have to get moving. She kind of comes to and sees them and you're like, "Oh, man, the thing that she wanted was right there." But I have a feeling by the end, you're gonna have that play, and again, it's a trope, but when she finds him and ends up going, even if she finds out he did do it, didn't do it, but her whole life's based on going and finding him and killing him. What does she do then? What happens when you go and really what happens if you go and find out the thing that you've been focusing on your young life, but it's not true, and it didn't happen that way, or you have to rely on now the person who ended up doing it. It's crazy, and I really
Yeah.
thought this first
And
issue really was good.
it was, and I thought one of the very interesting clues was when she asked the one samurai who she stole the sake from if he knew who the
Yeah.
black samurai was. He knew right away who it was, and he said the name Yasuki or Yasuk.
Yep. Yeah.
And so you gotta, and because he ends up being clearly a villain because he wants to kill her, lets her fall through the ice. Uh,
Mhm.
you gotta think, well, maybe this guy, the black samurai, and this Yasuk, the black samurai, and this other samurai, they have
Yeah.
the Ronin and the samurai have a history together that so many things are hinted at. There's so many interesting character arcs. Okay, what's the full story of this young girl who calls herself nobody? What's the full story of this black samurai? What's the full story of this other samurai? Even that
Yeah.
small boy. There's
Yeah.
all these characters are coming into play here, and this is all in one issue. And this is exactly what a first issue is supposed to be. And one of the benefits that we have when we're reviewing indies is because we often review first issues. Boy, we can it a first issue is so important, and we're very fortunate. I mean, this is another example of a story that starts off right. They sometimes they go awry. Maybe this will go awry and drag on, but this
Yeah.
is a really good way to get me into this story because I'm coming back. I want to know what happened in the
Yeah, I wanna
second
see
issue.
what yeah, I do too. There's funny plays in here too. I mean, one thing is, this girl looks like she's like 8, right? And the thing that gets her in trouble is she steals alcohol. She's drinking alcohol. She's chugging it at one point. She's loving it, but even then, I love when she asks. this samurai. Hey, have you seen this samurai with skin as black as beetroot? And he just like, and he barely looks at her. The way the art is, he's talking, but he's like not even looking down at her. She's not even good enough to look down on. But he says, "Oh, if that's what you're doing, you're looking for a ghost. The man you speak of hasn't been seen for many years now. His name was Yasuke or Yasuki, and the land is better without him." And again, we kind of get this gist that this is a full out, and this is a samurai talking about a disgraced samurai, which he again would be nothing to him, and ends up saying, "Yeah, he's a ghost and whatnot." And I thought that that was really cool play. And in that, you do have, if you're going to have a first chapter like this, and a lot of it's art, a lot of it's subtle, you do want to like the main character. And boy, she's spunky. At that one point when they do stop this caravan and like, "Hey, you want to buy fish?" It's almost like, this is funny, in the Philadelphia area, I used to go to the Phillies games a lot as a kid. And when we would go, you'd have people where when you'd stop at the light, they'd come running out and they'd sell you newspapers, or actually the big thing were soft pretzels in these big sheets, and you'd get them and whatnot. That's what this reminds me of, the feudal Japan version, when you end up, this caravan stops and these kids come running. "Hey, would you like to buy these fish? You want to buy these fish?" I'm waiting for them to like start cleaning the front, window and stuff, but they end up where this guy, gal, I thought it was a girl, but they say him, says, "Wait a second, where'd you get these fish? Here? Well, this is my father's land. They're my fish. I'm not buying my fish." And that is a really cool way to remind you of how some of the rules are in a feudal society like this, and how they are treating this. And that's when the girl's like, "Screw you, jerk." Like, she doesn't care. The rules are nothing to her, because she's kind of left outside of them anyway. Why follow rules that don't even accept you in them? So this guy has to be like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, stop it there. You can't yell." And then she goes and steals sake. What is she doing? But I
Yeah.
did like it. What would you give it?
I would give this as an opening issue, this definitely, has got me interested. I'm gonna give it a solid, I'm gonna give it an 8.5.
Yeah, I'm actually gonna go. I'll go 8.8, and I'm only gonna up it a little because of how much the way the character work, and the way, the subtle way of actually by the end saying, "Oh my god, like, I didn't think that I got as but I actually did." Like, this happens a lot, first chapters of manga, where they end up almost going with, yeah, you get a mission statement. Hey, she's gonna go off and doing that, but you really wanna set up the characters involved and the mystery around them and things. So I'm gonna give it a little bit of a bump, but I thought the art was great. The art is so good and does a lot of the heavy lifting, like you said. But go to the last issue. The last issue of the show, and boy, here's the thing, we talked a long time about Minor Threats because of how much we liked it, right?
Yeah.
The Starhenge is one of those books that when I'm reading it, all I can think in my mind is, how are we gonna talk about this in less than 7 hours? Because it ends up where you can, that like, it's not a book that you're gonna be able to come on a podcast and go, word for word, tit for tat, and explain, because a lot of the stuff just starts to blend together. A lot of the stuff is feels, but also story. Liam Sharpe is not holding hands at a lot of points, though it is starting to get a little clearer as we go. But I said to you, before we started recording, that boy, this issue really got to me in the idea of, yeah, I might want to read this in trade. I think that it's one of those, even if you collect it issue to issue to issue, there are going to be times when not only will you want to go back and read it, you might have to, because of how dense it is, and maybe, hey, what's this connection and what that. But it is, as we said, Starhenge, book one, The Dragon and the Boar, number 4 of 6. And it is all by Liam Sharpe, written, illustrated, and lettered by Liam Sharpe. You have the Dave Gibbons font. I said before, that always throws me. I'm like, Dave Gibbons? Oh, it's a font. But yeah, it's all this. And boy, he does it again, where you are going to go through different kinds of art. You're going to end up having an old school comic book that is done so well that it's ridiculous. Even if you sit there and say, well, I didn't need that, or that was just the art itself, you can flip through and just say, holy crap, this looks like this. Then you go to the next page, you're like, whoa, what's this going on? You have some psychedelic stained glass looking things. Then you go to the next thing, and it looks like it's, from a page ripped out of the original Canterbury Tales. I mean, all these things are so crazy done that even if I did, and sometimes I don't know what's going on, but I'm still impressed by it. It's still one of those where if somebody's flipping through and doesn't even read a word, they're gonna be impressed by this. You can't help but be impressed by it, but I'm sending it to you
Well,
because of this, and again, you told me before, just as a spoiler, that you thought this was a little down from what we had gotten before.
well,
Is it because it's, like, starting to get a little more linear, or is it just you're tell me, because
I think the way I would describe it is it's just kind of wonky. Now I know
okay, yeah.
that's not like a really impressive word,
It
wonky, but
is,
it
though, you're
feels
right.
wonky because I will say this: it's very interesting. I kept my notes from the very first issue. Not so far, we're 4 issues in. That first issue crammed
Yeah,
so much information, way more information than the next three combined. Actually, there's a lot of information in that first issue alone, and I've kept notes on second, third, fourth issue, and I've had to, and I've reread the issues, and it this feels very. He not only tries to he crams almost too much in the first issue,
yeah.
not enough in the second, little lot in the third, uh, and in this issue he jumps back. There's so much. There's a lot of telling us what's going on as opposed to showing us, which I know is ironic because people are thinking this is Liam Sharpe. He's a fantastic artist, and you
Mhm.
better believe he's a great artist. He
Yeah,
is.
it is
But
weird that
but
he should be working well with himself, right?
well, yeah, but I mean, the bottom line here is that there's no way that if we just look at the art, we're going to know what's going on.
No,
There's no
no, I
way, and
and that's why I didn't mean that when I'm just saying impressive, you're right.
yeah, I
There's
mean,
no way.
so I say that as somewhat of that's a criticism because I look the story here at heart isn't particularly complicated. It's basically uh, I can sum it up in a paragraph. In the far future, humanity has pretty much has went traveled to the stars. We're battling against creatures from another planet who are science based. We're magic based in the future, and they sent people back in time because humanity, we defeated them with magic. And so they went back in time in Earth's past and destroyed the beginnings of magic, which happened to be at the beginning of the Arthurian legend and something to do with Stonehenge. And that's
Yep,
pretty cool. And that's pretty
it
cool.
is cool.
And the future of and far in the future, this Ur Queen, this Ur Queen, uh, orchestrated events so that she wouldn't forget about the power of magic, no matter
Mhm.
what was done by the alien enemy. And so she has in these meta veld, there's different velds. One of the velds, she
Yeah,
basically put the memory of magic in it, and she sent her son, basically Merlin, back in time to protect magic. And meanwhile, in the 21st century, we have this Amber and Daryl characters who appear to be the reincarnations or the generational iterations of Merlin and I believe now Gwendolina,
Gwen,
who is
yeah.
actually Merlin's wife, because we were wondering who Amber was. Maybe she was because we know she's a witch. But so I think there's some there's these are still open questions. I could be wrong on this. I'm speculating on this, but
But it is wonky. I agree.
it is wonky. It's interesting, and for those I like I'm really I want to see how this ends. It's interesting, but a lot of the you and I mentioned it before. His Brave and the Bold
I
with
was gonna
Wonder
bring it
Woman,
up. I was gonna
yeah, and
ask you, are you
Batman.
starting to get worried because of The
Yeah,
Brave
well,
and the
no,
Bold?
there's
Because it got
definitely
wonky at the
yeah,
end, didn't it?
yeah. No, it did, and but again, this story here, I'm still basically getting the gist of this story. I mean, I am,
Mhm.
and but I, it's not, it's not smooth. This requires, dare I say, more work than I should. More, it shouldn't
Yeah.
require as much work as I'm putting into it to sort of feel because it doesn't flow easily. This isn't an, it's not flowing smoothly. It's a
Yeah,
rough
yeah.
ride. It feels like it feels to me like a stormy sea of a storyline, and I kind of got to go back and reread
It is
things. And
funny. I just keep thinking about you saying about him not working well with himself as an artist, but maybe the play is because he's wanting to do too many styles and he wants to make it like each issue has to have the one I think it was the second issue maybe where you even said and you made the comment, which I remember every time we do it, the idea that usually we'll complain if you have 7 artists in a book.
yeah,
But yet in this instance, we kind of do, but we don't. So we're not, but we like because it was so jarring, some of these things. And maybe this idea of him needing, like, okay, in this one, I'm gonna do like a '70s kind of horror comic deal, and I'm gonna do it, and it's even gonna have the borders like that, and you're gonna have a fade on the thing. Maybe that's not letting him tell the story in as linear or as a non it complicates matters because he has to then come up with a reason, and he's almost fighting against himself. I will say that I think one of the things is he's doing a good job in this. We're not saying it's not good. It's
Right.
just this issue is a bit wonky. I think that one of the things he has to work on is not just and this is something that you don't normally think fully of, but his pacing is off, but it's pacing of total issues in a series. Like you said, he dumps info in the first issue, then we kind of pull back and actually have recap. Then we end up doing more and then kind of pull back and give a reveal. And maybe you got to smooth that out. But again, maybe some of these drastic art styles that he wants to impress you with his art. I mean, there's no one he's not going to deny this. He wants to show you, and he is showing us that this guy is an awesome artist. Even me, who I like Liam Sharpe as an artist, but I tended to think that he was really in because of that Brave and the Bold, the stuff at DC, and even the Green Lantern, that he was more of that almost like living vegetation style. And he's changed things up a lot in this. And maybe he did see some of the criticism, like, screw that, I'm going to show you. It's almost like a master class of art. That's any review is
Yeah.
going to mention the art right away. But I think you're right. The pacing of it is a little off in this issue. And here's the thing: we have two more. You don't want to get wonky at this point. You don't want to end up confusing the story. And when you said about the story being very basic, it kind of is. And when you were saying that, I kind of thought to myself, as you're explaining it, I could easily get that story of what you said and fit it into a big Doctor Strange event, say at Marvel, or I could take it into a JLD story at DC. And both of those stories, with me thinking of the idea, Doctor Strange ends up knowing that magic's going to be done, so he makes a pocket dimension, puts that in.
Yeah.
It would be awesome. That sounds like an awesome story because it is. It's really cool. And then even then go back to, ancient. You have Excalibur. I'm telling you, you could have a lot of crazy things going on, but it is kind of getting a little. You're right. It's a lot of work. It
Well,
really is.
and what adds to the initial confusion, although it's not confusing, it's obvious what he's doing, but I question whether or not it's
Yeah.
it's the most effective way of doing it, is that he really tries to break the fourth wall here. I mean, the
Yeah, he
comic
does.
book is actually written by one of the characters, Amber Weaver. Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
comic book within a comic
It's
book is
her.
written by
And
the
even
witch Amber,
mentions
but yet Liam
Saga
Sharpe does the pencils.
and mentions Saga and Monstrous, and Liam Sharpe is in the credits of the crowd. It's a
Yeah,
little too much.
yeah,
It's funny too because I wasn't even thinking. I'm like, she ends up in this narration. She says, "This is the best way for me to tell you what happened." Is it? But she says it is. It's almost like her notes and that. I'm telling you, the idea. Like, I'd love to know how long it took Liam himself to draw this little mini comic in there. And I'm telling you, there's not enough time for that, Amber. You got to tell us the story. You don't need to do it in comic form. But when she even says, okay, I love comics, Saga or Monstrous are my jam, you're pulling us out because then I'm thinking to myself, oh, why didn't you mention Once and Future, another King Arthur type story? And then I'm like, oh, that's a different company. That's
yeah.
why. That's it. I'm like, oh, I get it now. This is an Image thing. And it kind of made me laugh. But again, that ended up throwing me out. And then when I saw Raps Mahale, I thought of Rags Morales, and I'm like, I think that was kind of a play. And I'm like, oh my God. And here is what I think is maybe the deal as well. At Image and him doing this is a passion project of his, right? He's doing all this, and I am looking. I don't know, and I don't think a lot of times with these things you have much of an editor. There's no editor that's going to come with these and be an editor in the ways of, oh, I don't think you should have that character, whatever. This is Liam Sharpe's deal. This is his own deal. So maybe it needs a bit of editorial deal. Maybe he would have been good to. I mean, he did the bunch of stuff with the Grant Morrison. Maybe go to Grant Morrison, say, hey, when I do this, can you kind of, push me through? Because he is an artist more than a writer. And we're seeing some of the things that threw us off in that Brave and the Bold. That was years ago.
Yeah.
That wasn't, yesterday. But since then, he's kind of done a lot of art. I think that his writing, while it's good and he has concepts that are really neat, I think that the way that he's portraying them each issue and the pacing of issue to issue is a little off.
Yeah. Uh, it was. Now, having said that, if you're really into King Arthur lore, there is some Easter eggs here. Now,
Yeah.
I had to Google this. I'm not as much into King Arthurian, Camelot legend as some are, but there's some Easter eggs to be had here. He does distinguish and he makes it clear how this deviates from mythological
Mhm.
Camelot, which I thought was cool. In particular, I liked how Merlin, with energies, he bound the timeline. He altered Uther's DNA. Uther's son would become uh, Arthur Pendragon,
Mhm.
and
Yep.
Uther ends up having shape corking abilities that Merlin gave him from the future, and he changed his shape to basically make love to basically screw another king's queen,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
Arthur was born. And but the concept to get out of that is that this corking ability altered the DNA, and it stayed. The DNA basically stayed along Arthur's bloodline
Mhm.
to present day, and presumably Daryl. I'm assuming either Daryl or Amber are part of that bloodline,
Yeah.
and they're in the 20s, and they're in the 21st century. And so everything does link here, and it's not that complicated to figure out. It's just because of the frankly jarring artistic styles, which kind of work. I mean, like you said, it's kind of funny. It's from the same artist,
Mhm.
and so the story's there, and yet somehow I remain intrigued. So I'm sitting
Oh,
here.
yeah,
It
I'm
sounds
I'm
like
with
a
it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it sounds like a criticism when we say it like this, but I'm we could get to the end of this book one, because this is we're gonna get 6 issues for book one.
Mhm.
So I don't know how many books this is gonna be, but if he wraps it up and puts it in a nice little bow at the end of book one here, I hope he nails the landing on I want this to be Game of Thronesy, like,
Yeah.
end the first season really good. End this first book one on a high note, so that's pulls us back for book two. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, I'm with you. And again, I'm glad you said it because we don't not like it. This is one of those books that there's either going to be people who are like, I didn't even read it, but I think a lot of the people who read it are going to be very, very upset at us. I'm trying to think of the word of how they're going to get. Oh man, how could you say that? So let's see you draw that. Or it's not about that. It's about the idea that I'm still intrigued, but I'm getting the idea, and some of that in this issue. It's almost. It reminds me of almost the play where we have some issues where they have a time travel deal, or you're telling it out of time, but that at the end, when you unravel it and look, you're like, you didn't need to do that. That did nothing for the story. And some of this almost feels like you get to a point where Liam just wants to kind of prolong things, so I'll put this in a comic, or I'll do this art style, or end up doing that because there's something a little, like you said, wonky about the whole deal, and he's just trying to, okay, let's get this set up and let's get going. And it almost is, like I say, some certain writers who might be on like certain books, like a Swamp Thing, ends up with this
Yeah.
narration that is like to say, hey, I left the room through that door, you end up having 17 narrate because it's not real exciting to say I went out that door, so let's spruce it up. It works. And I think some of that is in this, but in the art sometimes as well of let me gussy this up a bit. Let me fancy it up because it has to be fancy. But overall, you have to tell the story. You don't need to get wonky. You don't have to have, like you said, an info dump followed by nothing, followed by no. It's kind of an odd play, but overall, I did remember while I was reading it too, just as an aside, most of my King Arthur stuff was from playing the pen and paper role playing game Pendragon. When it's weird when you said Pendragon, then I'm like, holy crap! Now I remember where because I used to read a lot of myths and stuff, and the King Arthur stuff intrigued me. But I remember playing the game Pendragon, which kind of got really deep into it. It was a really cool game. But yeah, that's a lot of my knowledge. And I don't. It's one of those things when you think back, like is that all accurate, or did they make some of that up? So I'm like, I don't know, but I did like that idea where I saw some of the things. Ooh, that's not really what I remember happening, and that's cool because he is telling a more realistic, not a mythological deal, but also it's kind of changed a bit with the way magic and the way this time traveling going back. So I like that. I like that he has done that. So I'm still intrigued. Like you said, I'm just hoping that it ends on a high note and that we continue to get it because it seems like a lot of people love it.
Yeah, no, it's good, and I will say that it's possible that maybe the comic book within a comic book that we're getting in the story, that in the interplay between science and magic, how much is real, how much is not real, and some of it, comic books reflect our imagination. It reflect,
Yeah,
so some of it may have happened, but what's reality, what isn't? If time is changing because of this war back in time that keeps changing the present and changing the future, the use of a comic book might be clever. It hasn't quite clicked for me yet, but
yeah,
there's something. I get the sense that there's something clever about it, especially when one of the comic within a comic writers is one of the main characters, and Liam Sharpe is an artist for both.
yeah.
I
So
mean,
he knows
it's
her.
it yeah,
They've been hanging,
yeah,
right?
so it's interesting. So like I said, but, anyways, what would you give it?
I'm gonna give it a 7.5,
Okay.
and I still think people will be mad at me.
Yeah,
Uh, and the play, that's the weird play of that is I said about a story that, and we've had this. We had a Harley issue where you tell things out of time. Hey, we start at the end of it, and then, like I said, at the end, you're like, "Why'd we do that? There was no reason." I'm starting to think of that with the fourth wall stuff here. I don't like fourth wall breaking. Yeah, there's characters like a Deadpool that'll do it, but even then, they rely on it a lot, too much. It ends up throwing you out, and yeah, it's fun at some point, but to me, this isn't the book to do it. This is serious stuff. This is, adventure and myth and all that. I don't think of, and maybe his play is to do that, to lighten the mood, but it pulls me out every time because I don't think of a story where you have basically the world and a timeline in peril, and you're going back to King Arthur to have it be almost like a Harley or a Deadpool, where they're like, "Hey, look at me. I know this lady, and we did a comic together." It feels, I don't know. It feels very pretentious in my mind, or it feels very just not right. Like Liam Sharp's kind of laughing at us. He seems
yeah,
like a nice guy though,
uh,
but 7, I could even go 7, but I'm gonna go 7.5 because the art individually just there is great. I
yeah,
mean, it's great. It just, you're right though. It doesn't tell the story. A
yeah.
lot of it is static images. That's something with narration that I hate. So there's a lot. This is a thing. 7.5 for me for this actually jumps a lot of hurdles of things that I really hate when I read comics, especially the idea that I have to read it 3 times to
Yeah.
even get, because also I'm trying to, when I read it, I think you might be the same. I don't want to go too long, but the idea when you read it and you say, "Boy, that was wonky and I didn't get a lot," you almost blame yourself then. You're like, "I gotta go back and reread it because I
Yeah.
know I'm a dummy. I probably missed it." And then each time I'm like, "No, I don't think but I better do it again." And then I
Yeah.
go and finally we go to do this. I'm like, "No, I know what's going on. It's just kind of a little a downer at the end, and I want to see more of the bigger picture."
Well,
So,
I'm gonna agree with I agree with your score. I share it 7.5,
yeah.
and there's something about it. Uh, I just love the chances that he's taking, and I love that
Yeah.
maybe he's making some narrative mistakes. And Liam Sharp is not he's an artist first and a writer second, and I think it shows. But he's not a like there are
He's not a
certain
bad
like
writer,
he's not a
right?
bad writer. I love
No.
this. He's thinking big. He's thinking narratively big, and I really really love that. Go big or go home. And he's
Mhm.
got the confidence to take these extraordinary risks, quite frankly, with these different artistic styles. He's challenging himself. I love it. I got to give one other mention here. In the comic within a comic, it stars Amber Weaver, who's a character in the story who we believe is probably the reincarnation of maybe Guinevere or some witch or something.
Yeah, yeah,
And then there's the other character is Daryl, but in the comic within a comic, he is actually Kushum Saul. Now, the
yeah.
name Kushum, I Googled it. It actually means the very first recorded name in history. So if you look on
Okay.
in the oldest archaeological dig, the first reference to a human being by way of a name was Kushum. So maybe that's some significance. The
Yeah.
first name of a human. Uh, I don't know,
So
but I mean
crazy.
he's clearly here. Maybe I'm just making all this crap
No,
up
there has to
because
be
I'm
something.
it's got to be something, because that's just out of the blue. We've never got this Adam Weaver and Kushum Saul star in Death Robot from the Future. I mean, okay.
Which that's what you had, and that's the crazy play is she's telling the story about that death robot, the bad guys coming back, and then Daryl transforms. There's a lot of stuff going on there that ends up like, I don't know that telling it through a comic book story like that really gives it the oomph that I thought that it needed, but I think that it does mean something. I don't think he's throwing things in just to throw them in. though some people may argue that, but, I'm looking at the comic book deal, as you said. I really do like the look of it. It just threw me off when we get to it, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah,
Yeah.
so you're gonna go 7.5?
Yeah, 7.5, and yeah, it's,
One of the things I'll say about Liam Sharp, just as to end this, is a lot of times now there's heavy narration in this, I'll give him that, but when you actually do get the dialogue, like it's actually pretty good. Like, he is good with the back and forth dialogue. There's a little of it with Daryl and her, and then as it goes, there's not a ton, I wish there was more, but it's not like one of those where it feels very stiff or it's pretty good with that. It's just I think it's pacing. I think the pacing and not getting so crazed up with the different art styles, I think could really, benefit this a lot.
oh,
But
I
this
agree.
is his thing and this is what he's doing. So 7.5 for that, and
Yeah.
that's it.
O
That is it
overall,
for
I
the
have to
show.
say it's been, I've quite enjoyed this week of independent comics.
Yeah.
Hitomi, Starhenge, Minor Threats. This was, it was, quite enjoyable all around.
Yeah, and we did it last week. It wasn't an official thing that we're ever gonna do, but just to shout out, there were some other issues that did come out, and one of the things, obviously, Once and Future ended up ending with issue 30. We're not gonna suddenly just come in here and, "Hey, issue 30," so it would have been but it actually ends pretty well and actually sets up possible continuation out of that, so I actually really like that, and there was one other thing, and I can't remember what it oh, Do a Powerbomb. Do a
Yeah.
Powerbomb #5 came out, and that's one of my favorite comics in all of comics right now. It's just, again,
It's
it had
fun, yeah.
already started going on and whatnot, but that book is good, so I'd recommend checking those out as well.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
alright.
So, that's it.
Well,
That is
that's
it then.
it,
Yeah,
and
so everybody check out Rocky's
yeah,
channel here if you're watching it on on the channel. I'm sure you've already checked it out. That would make
yeah,
sense, but if you're
and,
listening to this as a podcast, please go over, check it out. It's the Comic Boom channel. Awesome stuff. Rocky's an awesome guy. He's Canadian, so we'll forgive him for that, but
how
there
bad
you
can I
go.
be? Come on.
I
Uh,
mean, that's really what the play is. But the show notes will have a link to go straight to that.
and, also shout out to Weird Science, the podcast, Weird Science DC. You guys do manga, Marvel. You could join the Patreon for Weird
Yeah.
Science. It's join the Get Fresh
Oh.
crew, beat up boop boop.
Mm-mm.
How do I
Yes.
do that?
Boop, boop.
Boop boop.
That's what I always do. I don't even know what the heck I'm doing.
Uh,
But yeah,
uh,
that'd be cool.
good
So yeah,
times.
I like doing this. I really like kinda it's one of those things when you're reading comics like me and you do for reviews a lot of times, you feel like, you have to have a reason to read, and it gives me a reason to read these indie stuff, and I'm enjoying it. So thanks for
Yeah.
doing it with me and really coming up with the idea of all of it and doing it on your YouTube channel and then sending me it's most of your work. So I give you I commend you for that. But that is that. So
Uh-huh.
you can end up pushing us out of here.
All right. Until next time, Comic Boom and Weird Science out.
Out.